Yo guys, Ponchy here, and today I'm going to show you how to initialize and create a fat bass patch on your Moog Sub Phatty. Let's go! Alright guys, so we're going to start off by hitting Activate Panel. Now the point of this video is to show you how to create your own patch and not have to rely on the presets, and potentially use the presets as a way to store your own patches rather than use the default ones. So the biggest thing here, I know this all looks super daunting. It is when you first get a synth, especially if you're not used to subtractive synthesis. But you know, if you just take it one section at a time and you start to see you know, the different sections for what they are, it's definitely not as bad as it seems at first. So we'll just go through each section here individually. So preset section, of course, self-explanatory, not going to use that. The pitch section, however, is definitely something we want to look at. You want your fine tune to be in the middle. You want your glide rate to be down. For this purpose, you can turn it up if you want. All glide does is make a kind of a connective sound between the two notes that you press. This is what it sounds like. It's like that slide thing. That's why it's called glide. I'm not going to worry about that for this video. Modulation. Now, this is basically your LFO section. Now, if you've seen my Moog Grandmother video about the LFO section, it's very similar. It's a little bit more, you know, this isn't a semi-modular synth like the Grandmother is. So what you get here is all you get. However, there's a lot of hidden settings as well. Again, I won't be going through that in this video. If you want to see a video about the hidden settings on this Moog, then we can definitely do that sometime. But right now I want to show you guys how to get fat bass, and the only way to get that is to kind of initialize your panel, because it's very possible that once you hit activate panel, depending on how your knobs were, you might not hear anything at all, and I'll be able to help you with that right now. So LFO rate doesn't matter where you have it, as long as you don't have any of these amount knobs up past 0, and as long as you don't have your mod wheel all the way up or even just past 0. You want it to be all the way down. So if you have your mod wheel all the way down, keep all these amounts at 0. You don't want your pitch amount light to be on here for Oscillator 2. The source doesn't matter because we're not using the LFO. And then again, the rate doesn't matter either. Oscillators. Similar to the Grandmother, you have your octave knobs here. You have your frequency knob that you can indeed use for detuning, which again, if you saw my Grandmother video, then you know how to use that already. Your waveforms, you got your different waveforms here. I won't be going through all of them. We're just going to go off of ear for this one. Mixer. Now this is kind of where it gets interesting. It's also similar to the Grandmother, except these mixer oscillator volumes say 12 on them. Again, if you're familiar with my Grandmother video, I can't stress enough, since they're somewhat similar. If you have these oscillator volume knobs up past 10, you're going to start getting basically distortion. So just keep that in mind when you're creating your patch. Do you want distortion, or do you want more of a cleaner sound? If the answer is the cleaner sound, you're going to want to keep it at 10 or even lower possibly. Now, if you might be asking yourself, well, if I turn my oscillators down too far, it'll be too soft. I won't be able to hear it. That's when you utilize your master. You want to turn your master up. You want to have your master up higher if you're going to have your oscillators lower, for a more cleaner sound, also known as headroom. If you have your oscillators maxed out, you have no headroom, it's going to start getting pretty gainy, getting a little distortion. And so you'll want your master to be lower in that regard. Now, the amazing thing in the mixer here, the amazing thing about the Sub Phatty is quite literally written in its name, Sub Phatty. This synth has a sub oscillator. Now, if you're familiar with the Prophet 6, that also has a sub oscillator that I talked about in my Prophet 6 video. So, and as another interesting thing, the sub oscillator also goes up to 12. So you can kind of start to see the amazing options that you have with this Sub Phatty. But being as this is a video about getting fat bass out of your Sub Phatty, the sub oscillator pretty much says it all. You know, there's not too much you have to do aside from turn up your sub oscillator to get a really good bass sound. But again, we'll go through that in a minute here. So that's your mixer section. Noise, again, you know, you don't have to use noise unless you want it to be really noisy. You know, you can get away with having a little bit, you know, maybe 2 or 3. Again, the question you should be asking yourself in regards to the mixer section is, do I want a cleaner bass sound or do I want a noisier, more distorted bass sound? So that's the mixer section. So the filter, of course, this is probably the first knob that everyone learns, the filter, how to do filter sweeps. So yeah, the filter is amazing. There's different ways to set the filter slope. If you want me to do a video on that, I'll do that another time. That's part of the hidden settings that the Sub Phatty has that are accessed not just by pressing any one of these buttons or turning any one of these knobs. So again, if you want me to do a video on that, leave a comment below. Filter cutoff, self-explanatory. The resonance, of course, you know, if this is your first time with synths, the filter cutoff and resonance work together. The resonance basically pushes up the filter cutoff curve right at the cutoff frequency, so it kind of gives it a little bit of a nudge upward if you're imagining like an EQ, an equalizer. But you know, that's the technical description of it. If you want you know, a more musical description, basically don't turn your resonance all the way up to 10. It can sound rather offensive to the ears, let's put it that way. You know, again, like I say in all my videos, you got to rely on your ear to come up with the best sound and not so much exact settings and stuff. So the multi-drive, this is a very interesting thing that the Sub Phatty has that the Grandmother doesn't, for example, or you know, the Minitar. The multi-drive is basically another form of distortion that you can do. You know, if you want to mess around with a different type of drive, a different type of distortion, keep your oscillators low, like I mentioned earlier, for a cleaner sound, and then use the multi-drive to give it some more drive. That'll be kind of a different result than just maxing out your oscillators. EG amount, envelope generator, just keep that at 0. KB amount, that's something you'll want to do to taste. So that's it for the filter section. Now, the other cool thing about the Sub Phatty is that it has 2 envelopes rather than 1 on the Grandmother, for example. One envelope is the filter envelope, which controls how quickly or slowly the filter kicks in. And the amplifier envelope is, of course, the one that just affects the actual volume. It's one of the final things in the audio chain of the Sub Phatty. So basically, the way to initialize your envelopes, attack all the way down, decay all the way down, or 0, however you want to look at it. Attack and decay, keep that all the way down. Sustain, keep it all the way up at 10. And the release, keep that all the way down as well. So same with the filter envelope. So that's how you initialize your synth. So you have, basically initializing is just another way of saying having a starting point for your synth in order for you to change your sound and shape it the way you want. So this is what it sounds like when we have everything initialized. So I'm gonna have the oscillators. The oscillators are all at 10. So let's try that out. We have our sub oscillator at 10. Let's mess with the filter a little bit. Also, another thing is you might want to go down an octave. You could go to -1, depending on where you want to play, you know. So I'm going to play the C in the middle here, so I'm going to use -1. Okay, so something of note here, I have oscillator 1 set to the lowest octave it'll go, and then I have oscillator 2 set to the octave above that. So when you have that octave sound, you're able to do the detuning method I talked about on the Grandmother. So let's mess with that a little bit. So like I said, I always like to turn it down before, or I like to turn the frequency down a little bit, well, a lot, to see what it sounds like, and then slowly bring it back up to where I feel is something I can work with. So right there, I have it set to be detuned a little bit from the first oscillator. Oscillator 2 is detuned very slightly from oscillator 1. That will definitely help give you a thicker sound than if you just had the oscillators hard synced. For example, if you press this button, both of the oscillators' frequency will be right exactly on. But part of the thick sound, in order to get a thick sound, you want oscillator 2 to be a little bit detuned. Now let's mess with our waveforms a little bit here. I like at least one of them to be square. So I have this one set there. And then the second one, you don't really need to know the other waveforms. Just go ahead and, you know, and then the other interesting thing about these waveforms is you can blend between them rather than just have one or the other. So that's why I say on this one, as opposed to the Grandmother video, for example, go ahead and just turn the knob until you find the sound that you like. You know what? I actually like, in this case, I really like the sound of having them both on square. I feel like it really kind of accentuates the fact that Oscillator 2 is just slightly detuned lower than Oscillator 1. So I'm going to leave that there. So that's a little bit, well, let's turn the oscillators down even more. Let's turn them to 7, for example. So now we got to turn the master up a little bit. So as you can hear, just that difference from going from 10 to 7, huge difference in gain, and most importantly, distortion. Certainly much more of a cleaner sound. Let's mess with the drive a little bit. And in fact, I'm even going to turn these down even more. Let's go to 6, which in this case is 12 o'clock on the knob. Okay, now let's add a little bit of the multi-drive and see what happens. Okay, so maybe I added quite a bit of it. I went all the way, but you can clearly tell that as soon as you turn the multi-drive up past 1 or 2, you can hear that not only does it really distort, but it definitely, well, you know, it gives you more volume, and ultimately that can kind of be perceived as better. You know, sometimes that can just be a trick of the mind, a trick of the ears. So what you really have to do is, if you're going to turn this drive up, very similar to what I was saying before about the oscillators, you're going to want to adjust the master, you know, to keep the same volume, basically. You don't want to be getting volume just from your drive. You want to always control your volume with your master. So ultimately, the drive, another great thing about the Sub Phatty is the drive doesn't really take away. When it distorts, it doesn't exactly take away all of the low end like distortion normally does. And that's mostly due to the fact that we have the sub oscillator. So the multi-drive is definitely a great thing on the Sub Phatty if you want a dirty sound. You know, some people really want that dirty bass sound. So I'll leave a little bit of drive up right now. Real quick, let's see what happens when you just get all of that from the oscillators themselves. I don't want to blow your guys' ears out, so I'm going to turn this down. Okay. Turned up oscillator 2 all the way. Let's turn up oscillator 1. Now let's turn the sub oscillator all the way up. Now, as you can see, I have no drive whatsoever, but I have all the oscillators maxed out to 12. I don't even have any noise on there. But this just goes to show you how much the Sub Phatty can distort on its own without even using the multi-drive. And if you turn up the multi-drive even more, you can seriously push some insane gain and drive and distortion out of this thing. So I'm not going to mess with that too much right now. Right now I'll just keep it back at 7. You know, if you really wanted, another interesting thing you could do, you could turn up your sub oscillator all the way, but you know, it ultimately, again, that distorts it, the sub oscillator, and it'll also kind of start to overpower the other oscillators, so you'll hear pretty much all sub and barely any, well, not barely, but not as much of basically the notes that are above the sub oscillator from the other two oscillators. So again, it kind of just depends on what you want. So one thing we didn't look at yet, the KB amount. Again, this one is to taste. You know, generally I like that in the middle, so that's why I keep it there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. You know, I hope that pretty much covers everything. As far as getting a fat bass sound, you know, there's plenty to go over with this synth that we don't have time for right now. So, you know, and as far as your envelope, you can mess with that a little bit. If you wanted to get that kind of fade in sound, you know, turn your attack up a little. Well, let's turn it up a lot. But again, the envelope is a thing in and of itself. I'll make another video on just the envelope if you guys want to mess with that another time. But for now, we got some pretty fat bass going on. The Sub Phatty is amazing. You know, it's so hard to choose between the Moogs because they're all amazing and they all have their own uniqueness to them. So, but yeah, the Sub Phatty, amazing. Sub oscillator, incredible. So hope you guys enjoyed. Hope that helped you out a little bit. If you have any specific questions, definitely let me know below. Yeah, that's it for today, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.